Please join me in welcoming our panelists for this discussion, Power Boost, Capitalizing Underrepresented Techpreneurs, Christopher Gray, founder and CEO of Scholly, Jessica Norwood, founder of the Runway Project, May Samali, associate at the Urban Innovation Fund, Melissa Bradley, partner at Sidecar Social Finance and adjunct professor at Georgetown University, and our moderator, Natalie Cofield, founder and CEO of Walker's Legacy.
Get started. First off, good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conference and for this panel. And I also want to thank Maya so much for her leadership in really pushing the agenda of diversity and inclusion and of access to capital for minority businesses here in DC and beyond. So as was mentioned, my name is Natalie Cofield. I have the honor of being the moderator for today's amazing panel. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today with our featured speakers is what we all struggle with. And you know, I very rarely run into a founder of color that has not had an issue accessing capital. And it doesn't matter whether it's a tech startup, a tech-enabled startup, or a conventional business. But today, what I'd like us to be able to do is hear from folks who are both managing funds, have started funds, or have created companies that have received millions of dollars in investment on what strategies they use to overcome the obstacles that we know are presented to us every single day. So first, I'd really love to kind of start with an ecosystem builder, as I'd like to kind of call it. Melissa is an amazing leader in the space of social finance, social impact, and investment, period. And so, Melissa, my first question is going to go to you, and if anyone else kind of wants to be able to answer this as well after you speak, talk to us a little bit about what our ecosystems need to be able to support our entrepreneurships more. And then, Jessica, I'm going to go into you with some of the programs that you're working on right now in Oakland. Okay?
So I think the positive thing is there are lots of ecosystems. And what I find is, having been an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, what we have is lots of opportunity, but I'll be honest, I don't think we have enough rigor. I think we have lots of folks who want to say this is really easy work, but because they're not coming with the intellectual capital, the experience, oftentimes we do not allow our entrepreneurs to perform at their best. So it is great to know that slowly but surely in local communities, like where you've done great work in Austin, like we see here in DC that Aaron alluded to, you're beginning to see universities come together with high schools, coming together with capital providers, particularly CDFIs. But I think it's how do you manage all of those people who have very different intentions, very different outcomes. And so it's good to see the ecosystem is building. It's great to see this conference exists. But I think we now have to not just settle for the fact that we're finally talking to each other. How do we raise the bar and figure out how to successfully place people through these programs to actually prepare them to get capital? I'll be the first to say, I think there is too much money on the street. The problem is, how do we get it to entrepreneurs of color? That is indeed the maze, but I think that the money exists, but there's an inefficiency in those ecosystems of how to work together. And in some cases, there's a false sense of competition because everybody's trying to get the next best person, as opposed to saying, how do I take with what I have and really progress them through?
Got it. And you're working on Project 500 here in DC. Will you tell us a little bit about that, too?
Sure. So Project 500 started last year. And the idea was that I find there are lots of programs to help entrepreneurs get started. And let's be honest, that's relatively easy. We probably all tried from a lemonade stand when we were kids to selling Girl Scout cookies to now being part of the gig economy. So the barriers to entry to being an entrepreneur have decreased dramatically. However, entrepreneurship, particularly for Black and brown people as a pathway to wealth, that has become extremely hard. We have to move beyond just asset development to economic security to wealth creation. So we started the program to help 500 businesses in DC scale. So folks who've been in business 1 to 3 years, the average age is probably not the millennial, probably 35 to 45, who are making under $1 million. How do we explicitly help them go over $1 million up to $5 million? We have entrepreneurs who want to have their businesses acquired. We have entrepreneurs who want to go on to get venture capital. So the idea is, when we realize that for many of us as people of color, this pathway to entrepreneurship is not an option, It's the only thing we have because we are unfairly compensated in the corporate workforce. We don't have access to opportunities and trajectory. So entrepreneurship is our default. But it should not be a default where we're still scrimping and scraping. So how do we leverage that as a pathway to success? So we have 358 entrepreneurs. We've increased their profitability by almost 40%. We've increased new hires by 12%, and the average increase for investment is $160,000. So it is possible, and we did that all in the span of 6 months.
Awesome. So speaking of scaling and talking specifically about the Black community, so first off, I'd like to at least note for women in the African American community, 58.6% of all Black-owned businesses are started or run by a Black woman, which is the only community that over-indexes in female entrepreneurship. And so, Jessica, you are working on a project with AEO and called the Runway Project. And Melissa kind of alluded a little bit to the lack of access to disposable income due to inequality in how much we get paid and compensated by employers and even how much we're able to receive for our companies. How do we get people to give what you call believe in you money as seed funding when they may be struggling with that themselves?
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what you're working on.
Thank you, Natalie. You know, I think there are some important parts when we think about what the entire ecosystem looks like, and in particular, places that don't have necessarily the robustness of ecosystems like you may find on the different coasts or so forth. I'm talking about where I live in Mobile, Alabama, in the Deep South, that there is a lot of great talent there, but the ecosystem isn't as strong. Certainly to the point that Melissa makes, the robustness and the ability to really take folks to that next level absolutely does not exist. And so one of the things we started talking about with the Runway Project and our great partners, AEO, based here in DC, was this particular issue that as soon as you tell somebody to start a business, you say, oh, you should borrow money from your friends and family. And then we're all looking around like, well, what friends? what family, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we got to those entrepreneurs very early, and then also intentionally connected them to Melissa, intentionally connected them to folks who were really demonstrating an ability to take those entrepreneurs to those next levels, to appropriately place them to the right kinds of capital. I think I hear a lot of times that, yeah, there's money out there, but all money isn't the appropriate money and at the appropriate time. And so we really try to support entrepreneurs at the very, very onset with that friends and family kind of money. The idea, though, is not only how we support the entrepreneur, but also how do we develop this network of friends and family, and how we take the infrastructure and the ecosystem to support people to then turn themselves from just sort of consumers, if you will, of the products and so forth, but also put them in a position where they are also partners with those businesses. And I think that then becomes a way that we can really grow other ways and other strategies to support wealth creation downstream further. You know, what we were able to do out in Oakland, we created a partnership with Self-Help Federal Credit Union, which is a CDFI, and we were able to, in the matter of about 2 hours or so, raise about $500,000 for this friends and family round of money. And what we understood by partnering and bringing this ecosystem together, particularly for this issue around friends and family, was that there was a huge pent-up demand that had not been met. And that part of it was that there was a lot of money in the Bay Area, but there was money for expansion, there was money for venture capital, but there was not necessarily this early money to be able to get people moving. And there certainly was not a real intentional entry point for everyday folks and institutions to come together to be in that first space. And so when we look at how we build out the ecosystem in other places like my hometown of Mobile, Alabama, and other places in the Deep South, those are the kinds of questions that we're presenting through the Runway Project.
Awesome. May, I'm going to actually go to you. What we've heard from both Melissa and from Jessica, you know, has to do with urban communities and what I'm kind of considering taking a bit of risk. And your background, both with your work with TUML as well as your role with the Urban Innovation Fund, is to basically go into urban communities and fund projects, programs, organizations that are doing work in what other people look at as extremely risky circumstances. Talk to us a little bit about why you all are doing this work, why you all are taking a bet on urban entrepreneurs in this way, and what some of the lessons that you've learned from urban ecosystems has been.
Sure. Thanks, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here. Really lovely to see all these faces. I am from the Bay Area. As we know, the Bay Area has a lot of capital, but we've found that at TUML and the Urban Innovation Fund, often this capital is not going to the people that need it most. And this is mostly kind of women, people of color, and underrepresented founders more broadly. So I'll start maybe a little bit about the genesis of TUML and the Urban Innovation Fund. My current role is at the fund. We're a venture capital fund kind of investing in transformative urban technologies. And we're interested in providing really the seed capital and regulatory support for entrepreneurs that are solving the toughest city problems. So problems that are perhaps very tricky and unsexy to be solved for the traditional entrepreneur, but things like traffic congestion, homelessness, access to education, access to healthcare. And the entrepreneurs that we're funding are often using a tech component as part of their solution. They're not just tech entrepreneurs, but the tech component often helps with scaling the solution from city to city. Now, TUML as an organization was more of an accelerator, and my role there was very much directing entrepreneurs as part of a program, getting them ready to go out into the world, raise that capital, and to scale their businesses. And these are entrepreneurs that very much were solving problems in their hometown. So we actually had kind of 38 entrepreneurs or businesses go through our program. And as part of that, 71% of them had a woman or a person of color on the founding team. Now, we didn't control for that when selecting our entrepreneurs, but we found that by having kind of an all-female team running TUML, we attracted a diversity in applicants, and applicants from all around the country and the world. And the reason that we kind of believe that urban entrepreneurs are best equipped to deal with these challenges in city environments is that they're dealing in areas that were traditionally the domain of government. And so if we see kind of government as predominantly being responsible for access to public services such as health, education, infrastructure, and mobility, and the nonprofit sector as well playing a role where there is a gap in service provision and delivery. Often we see these actors not necessarily being able to solve on their own these wicked public policy problems in our cities. Entrepreneurs, however, are able to take that risk. And the reason that they've been so successful is that they're coming from the communities in which the problems are deriving. And so they understand these problems better than anyone else because they've been there, they've been able to experience firsthand what it means to perhaps be on the streets or not have had access to education or healthcare when necessary. And they're able to go out there and do the customer discovery process in a way that a lot of other actors and entrepreneurs can't. And so, we have funded entrepreneurs that have built workforce training programs, but have a food service component. So Town Kitchen, for example, one of our entrepreneurs, Sabrina, based in Oakland actually, she saw this big problem with lack of workforce development and access to the workforce for the urban youth of Oakland, predominantly black populations. What she saw is this huge opportunity also for being able to deliver food to conference spaces and corporate environments. So rather than just becoming another kind of on-demand food service company, she developed a kitchen space, hiring urban youth and putting them through this program. And by doing that, her business model has actually become more robust because their retention rates are much higher. At the same time, they're employing urban youth, being able to have them have access to the workforce and go into more developed jobs after, say, being a kitchen hand. And Sabrina, as the kind of CEO, woman, person of color with the Town Kitchen, she was able to bootstrap her business until they reached $1 million revenue. And so what we're seeing in the city environments is that a lot of these urban youth, when they don't have access to capital, they are often the most creative when it comes to being able to bootstrap. Jessica, as you mentioned, kind of the friends and family round isn't necessarily available to these entrepreneurs. So what we're seeing is that they're often being pushed to make their businesses produce revenue more quickly. And so they're focused not so much necessarily on fundraising, but on making the business model work and getting it to a stage where they're able to then fund these enterprises and access institutional capital.
So Meg, good. There are a couple of gems. One of the things that, I'm also the founder of an organization called Urban Collab. So I think we actually may have talked at some point because it was actually created to do much of that same work in Austin, Texas. But with that being said, you have spoken on a number of gems and I've written some of them down. And I want to kind of move to you, Chris, now because we're talking about entrepreneurs, right? And we're working with, we're talking about ecosystem cultivation. And Chris, you are an entrepreneur. And you have built a company that not only helps people raise money for their scholarships, but you have obviously had to raise money yourself for your company. Talk to us about what worked and what didn't work as an entrepreneur who may have gone through any one of these types of programs, not any of these specifically, as you were going through the process of growing and expanding your company.
All right, so I started Scholly when I was still in undergrad, about two and a half years ago. And actually, I started in venture capital. I actually worked for a company, for a firm called First Round Capital. And that's actually how I met my mentor and my first investor, who was the founder of the firm. And I had a 15-minute, literally, I knew the guy for 3 years. I worked on the fund. And I went to him, with the idea to get advice on how to raise money, because I knew First Round invests, in companies that are much bigger than Scholly was at the time. We were just an idea. And after a 15-minute conversation, he told me, "Oh, I'm in." Like, I didn't ask him for anything, right? So but going back to the experience prior to that, because there was Shark Tank in between that, et cetera. What the rest of the panelists have said is really true. When I first started to raise money, before I aired on Shark Tank, before I kind of met Josh, et cetera, it was definitely a different experience. Most of the people around you did raise those friends and family rounds. I would have people tell me, "Oh, my uncle or my brother or my friend gave me like $750,000, and I would like call my mom and like joke and it's like, 'Oh, you gonna give me some money?' And she'd be
No,
like,
for real, no, Mom. You gonna give me some money?
You call
I gave you life. That's
Right.
If you call anybody in his family who gives you anything, they ain't go through me. You need to let me know. So fear in the family, that just really doesn't exist in that community. So what I've seen, and I kind of worked to change that, on the VC side, but also side. So what I dealt with, that I would be in meetings, and two of my co-founders were white, where they were helping me on the development side, and I developed a little bit of it as well. But they will have meetings where like the investor wouldn't even acknowledge me, where they would look at them and say, "Oh, well, you're that guy, whatever," and it was, and I was kind of undermined throughout kind of that process, and also kind of what I've seen throughout that is that what a lot of African Americans found like is not the capital, because I have friends who actually have raised like several $1 million for African American, but what happens is in the beginning, the real gap is the 0 to 1, like how to get your startup off the ground, raising the $500,000 round, the seed round. That's kind of what I've seen. But what I've seen after that, like once we added on Shark Tank, we had all that exposure, the traction. I mean, it was easy, right? We had the founder of AOL, who's here, who's in DC, who's one of our investors, and a bunch of other people. So it was easy after that fact. But I mean, asking yourself, how do you get entrepreneurs from like when they have those good ideas to the point, where they can even do that, right? For me, what I did was I found grant money. Kevin Plank, CEO of Under Armour, had a competition called Keep His Cup. I won 75 grand there. I somehow talked my university into giving me close to 60 grand. And I used the rest of my savings. So I bootstrapped it and got enough traction, because what you'll find is that when you can't find that capital, when those investors are undermining you, et cetera, you have to beat it with traction. You have to beat it with execution, and that's what I did. Then we were able to get met a producer. We were on USA Today, and a producer from Shark Tank reached out to us, and I started that process. And since then, it was there because we then had we're now like over 1 million users, and we've kind of tracked a lot of impact. So it was easy after that. But before that, going through that process was tough. It was and it was underwhelming. Another one of my friends, actually, who's based out in Atlanta, she's a black woman, and she went through 150 meetings before she got her first yes. And I would say before I got on Shark Tank, I may have had like maybe a little less than that, you know. And the same thing. Then what happens is I had some friends in venture capital who would tell me what happens behind closed doors. And there's this thing called pattern recognition in the space where if you're white, you come from a certain family, you have a certain background, have a certain job, went to a certain school, you match with Mark Zuckerberg or another successful founder. And when you don't have that, there are actually conversations behind a little internally. Because people say, well, they don't really know what to do with you. And there was one of my friends who actually was at the firm that, you know, didn't know she's my friend. You know, he told me that a lot of times when Black founders or African Americans or anyone who they can't place, who they don't kind of grasp there, don't fit that pattern, doesn't hit all those check marks, they will literally say, like they really shake their head, like, what do I do with this founder? How can we vet them? How do we know that his dad isn't this? He didn't, you know, go to Stanford or something like that. And they would literally not fund based on that. And it would not even be based on the idea, et cetera, because they've created that. So what we have to do is really change that narrative. And you look at, you know, Mark Zuckerberg, he was a white man, but before him, they were funding these kind of these little fratty business-like dudes, like finance dudes who were starting companies. And when he created Facebook, he changed that narrative. Now suddenly programmers and other people are now seen as entrepreneurs. And I think the same thing will have to happen for women and African American founders, is that we have to change that narrative. And that's something that I work to do every day with the exposure that we have from Scholly and such, is that how do we use our success to become visible and really change the narrative and change, you know, the identity of entrepreneur, because then we become a part of that pattern recognition, and then we change that funding ecosystem in its entirety.
So, you know, I want to say something that I feel like connects with that too, because this is what I have seen. Whether it's a tech company or an ecosystem organization, getting access to capital remains a problem. So there are a lot of organizations that work in our communities that don't have leadership that look like our communities at all. The founding team is not of the community whatsoever. The folks who are from those communities still can't get their hands on $1 million grant. Meanwhile, someone who did go to Stanford, who did go to Harvard, will be able to be funded by major corporate foundations and others who are willing to take a bet on them because they have the proper dressing. So I think even when we look at the accelerators and the incubators that we're trying to build in our communities, we're still struggling with getting access to funding and financing for those too. So with that being said, and that's real. Is that not real? That's real. Well, I'm going to say it.
Just
that's
you didn't
real.
know.
Just in case you didn't know, that's real. I also want to be mindful of the fact that all of us are kind of in a space of privilege. And there are folks in this room who didn't work for a VC or don't know someone or aren't connected in this way. What can we give them as keys of success and advice in raising funding and access to capital for them? For that person that's not going to be able to pick up the phone, that's not ever going to be on Shark Tank, that's never going to be able to connect with a city mayor. What do we tell them? We need to give them real actionable solutions today on how to fund their business. So I'm going to start here with you, Jessica.
You know, it's a good point. There's so many, as you said, Natalie, gems that are coming from the stage right now, and I think, you know, there's an important part about if we're asking for people to assimilate, or are we actually respecting the culture from which people are actually coming from, and then trying to wrap the funding and the finance around that. And so you know, just being real, there's a long way to go. And so we're saying that the bar is here, and we're asking everybody to jump here as well as do your work, create your business and so forth. We have to do a lot more of making sure that people are getting met where they also are as well, with the talents that they currently have, with the look that they have coming from, you know, the South or Middle America or wherever that might be. We have to just do a better job around that. I do think that as best as possible to keep working the business and making sure that the business model itself is going to be something that is, you know, profitable, to get in front of competitions or things. Take the time to find out the people who you really admire, that you see are doing some stuff that you think might be really great, and see if you can sort of pattern yourself after where they may have been or where they've gone. It doesn't hurt at all. and being in places like this where there are conferences or other things where you think there might be speakers that you really want to engage, as a first step, go to where some of those folks are. And I think that all of that starts to help. I certainly have to get up every week and get on an airplane and come to DC and go to the Bay Area and go to New York in order to even get my ideas and my thoughts out there. And so I would say you're going to have to push. And at the same time, those of us sitting on this panel and those folks in this room that care very deeply about this are also pushing on the opposite end to make sure that things meet you where you are as well.
So I think the first thing is we have to recognize that money is a means to an end. And I run into so many entrepreneurs say, I just want to raise money. But for what? And so I think the first thing is educate yourself in terms of what do you need the money for. I've had entrepreneurs come all the time, I need $500,000 for what? And then it gets really vague and murky. So I think be really clear, what do you need the money? Because the money is not going to keep the business going. It's going to figure out how do you get customers, how do you develop your business model. The second thing is understand the spectrums available. As part of BFF Labs, we have someone who was here, Angel Rich, who I hopefully can say has raised over $200,000 just through competitions and applying. We had someone who was at the anniversary event who's raised over $100,000. Be mindful of what's the money you want. For some reason, in our own application of pattern recognition, we want to be like all the white people. And we want to go get venture capital. I'm going to tell you, as a venture capitalist, that's the worst money you can possibly get. But it's not because we're bad people. It's because the source of capital. Charitable money has no risk associated with it, therefore they can take more risk. Venture capitalists, typically if they have pension fund money, they are the most risk averse, therefore you're going to have a higher likelihood of no. Even if you're white, you're a higher likelihood of no. Proportionally, of course, we're always going to be misaligned. So the second thing is be really clear, what is the type of money that you need? A gentleman in the room, Ade and I, we did a breakfast and we hosted about 50 entrepreneurs here in DC. And we realized that many of them realized, to your point, the opportunity cost associated with money was actually a distraction. And that they were actually getting to market quicker by focusing on either staying in their jobs longer, which gave them skills and money, or just hunkering down and getting their alpha and beta to market quicker because it got them customer traction. And guess what? Now they're more appealing to investors because they have something to talk about. They've moved from idea to validation. The other thing I would say is hold yourself to the highest standard possible. And I know we're all going to say that's BS, right? Particularly as black people grow up, you got to be 150% better, 200% better. But that is true. And so I think make sure that when you say I have a really good idea, you have really vetted it, that no one else is doing anything like you. And that doesn't mean like there's no other scholarship apps, right? But what is in that ecosystem? I find that entrepreneurs come all the time and they don't really have a sense of depth and breadth beyond the market. And specifically if you're a tech play, then you're automatically global, so you've got to understand the market that you're in. And the final thing I would say is who's on the team? At the end of the day, that's what we're investing in. Who are you? And I will say, I only invest in women and people of color. So I'm not getting all the Stanfords and the Harvards and the money we manage for foundations and high net worth individuals. They're very clear. We're looking at it from a diversity lens. So it's not about where you've come from, but do you even understand the sector? I have nothing against you if you just want to run something that you really like, but if you're talking about really creating wealth and scale, you have got to understand the nuances of every single geographic market, from here to China. You have got to understand the nuance of demographics. If you're saying African American women, we are not a homogenous group. How do you detail and gain traction around that? And I think that's where the biggest gap is. That as a professor, we don't teach people that, and you certainly don't get it in high school. And so that's where I would say spend more time getting the information and the skills to grow your business, and I guarantee you the money will come. The final thing I would say is there are now enough black people who recognize this gap of family and friends. There is now a plethora of micro VCs who are there to give you $50,000 to $150,000. One is Arlen Hamilton backstage. What she has done is, because of people like Scholly, that they have seen the change that African Americans can be successful. You have all these white guys who say, well, I think I'm ready, but they can't do it with institutional money. So Arlen has raised several $1 million from African American cash and entrepreneurs, from Mark Andreessen, from the guy who founded Box, their personal money, because that's what they have the most risk with. And she is successful. I think she's a portfolio of 15 to 20 companies. They are beginning to pop up and fill that gap. So be mindful that there are opportunities, but you do have to be ready. Arlen will say she's probably the harshest critic on any person of color because the risk she is bearing of not just giving money, but carrying the brand that African Americans can be successful entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Chris?
Yeah, so I really want to echo what Melissa just said. I think that, and when it comes to minority entrepreneurs, the knowledge gap of like how to raise money is even more, right? And you're not learning it in college, but you know, what a lot of my white friends benefit is they have exposure through other means. They have exposure through families and things like that. With me, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, from the South. And I really do. I just came up and and I put myself in the right environment. So to Melissa's point, it's so important, even if you just have the idea, because I understand some people, if you have a hardware startup, sometimes you need capital to really do it, but be able to really kind of put together a pitch deck that really has the data. Like, please don't go to people with your ideas, and, I mean, which is great, but understand the market, how to segment, how big is it, what's the market opportunity. You may have a great cash flow business, but it may not be a venture-backed business, right? Understand how much money you can make, what your price points are, what are your key metrics, what defines success for your organization, and you know, long conversation on like how to put together a deck. So, but really how to put together the right pitch to get and really understand the numbers. I was just at a judging a competition a few days ago, and the same thing. Entrepreneurs, they can tell you the idea, can tell you all the logic you're at, but you ask them, okay, what's the lifetime value of your customers, things like that. They can answer that, and I'm like, dude, you have an idea. You have I can't get behind anything but your word, and you're basically telling me you don't even know you don't even know how you're going to make money and how much money you're going to make. So doing that, I would say a second thing that's not talked about a lot. There are actually a lot of companies that give out loans that are actually started that are geared towards tech, that are smaller, between 20,000 to 150,000, that are actually tech focused, where they look at where they're actually are willing to take a little, surprisingly willing to take a little more risk. They aren't traditional banks, but they actually are willing to give entrepreneurs different funds. So there's something called the Enterprise Center, which is which is based in Philly. There's also an organization called Lighter Capital. There's a bunch of organizations that will actually give you money based on whether you get a percentage of your revenue, et cetera, that you can look at. So to really look at those options as well, grant money. So a lot of the money I got was through grant money when I started out. I got money from my school, money from different competition that was student-based. And I used that to bootstrap the company. And if you look at those competitions, there's a site called f6.com, and it actually has tons of accelerators and incubators that you can be a part of, and they do all the searching for you. So it's like Scholly, but for incubators and funding. And that is my third point: accelerators. If you have an idea, look at accelerators. These are organizations that give you $100,000 to $120,000, or sometimes a little less, and they give you resources. And when you go through the program, and they focus on ideas. When you go through the program, at the end, they do this thing. They do demo days where they put you in front of lots of different VCs and investors who can, and you're able to kind of once you pitch, the investors that are interested will come through afterwards. And that segues into my last point. These, even if it's not a competition, a lot of my exposure, so I got to a lot of my investors or people that I know in the space, has been through, they're not even a competition, just like events where you pitch, right? There's like Techpreneurs, there's a bunch of other different venues, and you have investors in the audience. And the beauty of that, even though when you pitch, you don't win necessarily prize money, you hit an audience, and it filters out all the investors who may or may not be interested in what you're doing. And afterwards, they come up to or reach out, and that's how. So when I was able to almost have sometimes 30 meetings within a week, just because of I went to a couple of events, pitched, and got the interest of a lot of different investors. Whether they said yes or no is another story, but it allowed you to get that exposure that you need. So to recap, I would say look at different new, more innovative loan programs that are out there that are geared toward tech startups and early stage ventures. A site called f6.com where it actually creates different accelerators and funding opportunities for everyone, and even you can filter for certain. There are like minority angel groups out there that you may not even know about, right? Looking at accelerators as when you have an idea, put together a strong pitch, understand your metrics, get into an accelerator, let them take you through that program to kind of get product market fit, demo to investors, and also events where you can get exposure to investors. So those would kind of be my tidbits, and they were very successful for me and a lot of entrepreneurs I work with and mentor. They do it, and it's really allows them to scale their efforts in raising money.
Awesome. May?
Yeah, so I want to kind of give a ditto to everything that's been said. I think that's great advice. Just to kind of run through the three main things that I would, tips to give to entrepreneurs to capitalize their businesses. The first, which has been touched on by Melissa in particular, was around not being obsessed with fundraising for the sake of it. I do agree that it's a means to an end, and it's phenomenal the amount of times that we see kind of the headlines lauding entrepreneurs for just raising money in and of itself, but to what end? I think it's really important to recognize that by getting institutional capital like venture capital early on. It can be detrimental for the ownership of your company. You're essentially giving away ownership of your company very early on for a bit of cash. And if you can get that cash in other means, it can be much better for you. One, easier to get. Two, you own more of your business, so you end up kind of getting more returns at the end of the day if your business is sold or if the business goes public. And I think the most kind of undervalued way of doing that, but perhaps the most powerful, is generating revenue quickly. So getting out there, getting your product to market, being really lean and scrappy in doing that, and being able to fund the business operations and expansion by just making revenue and profit and fueling that back into the business. And one of the most kind of successful ingredients across a lot of our entrepreneurs are those who execute and implement. Because I think ideas are cheap, implementation is the part that's really hard, and the part that's perhaps the most impressive to investors as well. The second kind of bucket, which relates to a lot of these programs that have popped up, is if you can't get access to institutional capital early on, if your business is one that is either capital intensive, so it might be a hardware startup, or you might be, I use the example of Town Kitchen, for example. Sabrina needed a kitchen to be able to cook the food for their business. They ran an Indiegogo campaign. There are other kind of crowdfunding platforms up there like Kickstarter, and there are now equity crowdfunding platforms that have come about after the Jobs Act. So Seed Invest, for example. There is one called Republic. And essentially, entrepreneurs can put their business ideas up there. You might need capital to go and build the initial prototype of your product. Or you might need it to go and be able to hire the kitchen to make things happen. These are often really good avenues for you to be able to access wide audiences. And if you don't know people that can give you cash in your friends and family, or you can't necessarily go and get that from a VC, this is a good way to reach a wide audience. And it's interesting, kind of statistically, these crowdfunding campaigns, 75% of the capital that's raised is from people in completely different geographies to the entrepreneur. So if you are in a city where, or a rural environment where you don't have access to those people, this is one way of overcoming it. And I'd say kind of the third bucket, or the third tip, is to go and build a network of allies. And this can be allies that are organizational allies, like early stage incubators or accelerators, or it might be mentors or organizations who have proven through their actions that they value entrepreneurs that are women or people of color or underrepresented entrepreneurs. And we see these popping up not just in the Bay Area, but here on the East Coast and throughout the US. I think there are organizations focused on women. For example, SheEO is an organization that, Chris, like you mentioned with loans, they provide loans to women who are capitalizing their startups in that very early stage up to kind of 100K. And that allows you, they're very low interest loans, 2%. You can repay it over a 5-year period. It's quite entrepreneur friendly. There are other collectives like Transparent Collective, which has popped up in LA, or Black Founders Network.
Or Walker's Legacy.
Or Walker's Legacy. And all the, the amazing organizations that these panelists run themselves. We've got Tummel, for example, an organization, the incubator as well. These organizations that are funding and support, and not just necessarily about providing the cash, but the networks, the introductions, being able to help you with getting your first customers, making the corporate introductions. They're really important networks to build. And there are more and more summits arising, so opportunities to pitch your competitions. I know 500 Startups, for example, is doing a roadshow of their Unity and Inclusion Summit. I was in LA earlier this year, and kind of room full of Black founders, and we had pitch competitions, we had workshops, roundtables, investors were there, incubators were there, founders were there. It was a great place for the ecosystem to be built and for people to kind of share notes and start those introductions. So I think kind of focusing on building revenue, utilizing crowdfunding campaigns, and then also building allies and networks allows you to kind of overcome some of those institutional biases that exist, and frankly, unconscious biases that exist that even VCs or investors that value diversity often don't realize that they're being biased in the way that they receive people that are pitching to them. And I think being able to have those conversations and call out behavior that's not acceptable also helps move the needle.
Awesome. Okay. I'm actually going to give a few of mine. I'm actually going to receive that ball that I feel like was kind of thrown in my court. I'm going to slam dunk it here. Because I haven't shared a lot about what I do. And as a moderator, sometimes you just have to insert yourself as a panelist. And so that's what I'm going to do. Maya gave me the stage, and you know what? I'm going to take it. So Walker's Legacy is a national women in business collective that represents more than 20,000 women across the country. We're named in honor of Madam C.J. Walker. We just heard a little bit about entrepreneurial summits and entrepreneurial programs. We've run a prospectus program, and it was an online accelerator for more than 75 women across the country, which included a $5,000 pitch competition, which happened in Houston, Texas. We are building local ecosystems throughout our network of 20 cities across the country and growing. And we've been very proud to have partners like Google and others who have been supportive of our organization, as well as the establishment of our foundation. And in fact, just this week, we launched our Moms Who Hustle program and our mobile app in 5 cities across the country, 4 cities and 1 additional community. So DC, in the Kenilworth neighborhood, DC in general, Detroit, Baltimore, and the city of Newark, which will be launching with the mayor of Newark next week during Mother's Day week. Next week, I'm really excited to say that we're going to be signing our MOU agreement with the Minority Business Development Agency. And we have really been a champion of advancing the conversation around entrepreneurship for the intersectional space of women of color in business. And we were also commissioned this year, and we released our report on Black female entrepreneurship, which was commissioned by the Small Business Administration and the National Women's Business Council, for which we have started to do congressional briefings and meetings with Congress members about why it is important to continue to keep supporting policies and programs that address our communities, particularly when you have the fastest growing entrepreneurial segment in the nation being women of color, both Black and Latina more specifically. So that's the work that I do, both with Walker's Legacy as well as with our foundation. We've been very proud to have W.K. Kellogg Foundation and Coca-Cola Foundation and the District of Columbia and others funding our foundation's work. And then we're also launching our Google Digital Coaching Program to help businesses get themselves online next week during National Small Business Week. So a lot of stuff is going on with our organization, and I had to share all that because I think it's super important. But as I'm kind of closing this panel and want to open it up to questions from you all, and I believe we have 10 minutes there, I want to be able to answer this question too, because I am a bootstrapping entrepreneur myself. And a lot of times people ask me how I have been able to do this. And my answers are, 1, humility. A lot of people don't know all of the sacrifices that have gone into the formation of any one of the ventures that I've developed. I've had 4 companies over the course of my life. And all of them required that I didn't do something, whether it was that I didn't buy clothes for a year, whether it was that I moved out of my place and lived with someone else, whether it was that I slept on a couch, whether it was that I lived in a room full of boxes. I did whatever I needed to do in order to save the money that I needed to save to take my business to the next level. And if I had a chance to do it all over again, I would. But you know, you can't do that unless you're humble enough to be able to make those types of sacrifices. And quite frankly, it was challenging because you walk into a room and at times people are the best dressed and sometimes you may be or sometimes you may not be. And you go through these ebbs and flows and these phases. And I just want to share that because I think it's very, very important. The next piece is saving. My first company that I started when I was 26, I started just because I was like, I feel like I could run this place, and I had no savings. Through the Lord's grace, I was able to get a contract, but my next company I started with savings. And so I think it's important that you start the process of acting like the CEO that you want to be right now by taking all the unnecessary expenses that you have in your life off the table and getting rid of any debt. Like, these are practical solutions on how you're going to get yourself funded. Getting rid of any debt that you have, because your credit score becomes important, even if you're talking about CDFI or even if you're talking about going to get a traditional loan. That is very, very important, and you want to protect that. The last thing is I learned how to make $1,000 look like $10,000, $10,000 look like $100,000, and $100,000 look like $1 million. Because I'm of the mindset that I've literally seen people blow through millions of dollars, spend millions of dollars on stuff that I'm like, yo, I could have gotten you hooked up with someone who could have done that for you for like $1,000. Like next time, just call
Let
me.
me know.
You know what I mean? But that goes to the whole being scrappy piece, right? Which is just really understanding what it is that's going to be necessary to get it done, and then getting it done by any means necessary. Because no matter, again, how much, if you can properly manage 1,000, you can properly manage 10. If you can properly manage 10, you can properly manage 1,000,000. So I think it's important that people understand how to actually properly manage whatever they're given, and to be able to take that to the next level. And then the last two things I'll say with my 58 seconds here, I'm doing pretty good, is just get started. We talked about grants. I say go after government contracts as well. Relationships are super important. And then the last really big one for me is just keep asking. And that goes back to humility. I mean, literally. Like, you have to be okay with the fact that people may say, she's so annoying, I can't believe she keeps emailing me about this, or I can't believe she keeps doing this. You know what? It's not about you. As Jay-Z said, I'm not looking at you, I'm looking past you. And so it's like, if that's fine, because I know 5 years from now, you'll be like, I'm so proud of her. Even though today you may say, will she stop emailing me? I'm prepared to deal with that, to get to the other side of success. And anyone in this room needs to be prepared to walk that line of humility, as well as like having the confidence to know that you should be asking for the things that you should ask for. And my Twitter thing is, my Twitter pinned quote is, I'm walking into everything I believe I deserve this year. I'm not taking no for an answer. And I purposely didn't put a year on it, because that's the mantra for every year. Okay, closing now. Why don't we open it up for questions? Do we have any questions from anybody in the room? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Greg. I just moved here from Silicon Valley, and I maintain relationships with several of the largest firms in the Valley. I get calls, maybe 2 a week, from entrepreneurs that are starting companies, and I focus on African American, mostly men. I guess I was wondering about 5 questions that you would ask, because I just had a group of people who contacted me, and I asked them 2 questions, and they realized they have to go rewrite their business plan from those 2 questions. And the main question is, how can you handle the 10x rule? And what that means is that if you're 10 times better than the current solution the customer has, then that's venture funding. If you're 5 times better, that's friends and family. If you're 2 times better, you can't get customers to switch what their current solution is. So I was wondering about a couple of key questions you guys would recommend people be able to answer if they want to go down the funding route as they're putting their companies together, because there are a lot of people putting out a lot of energy on ideas that are just not viable because of their ability to move customers to their concept.
So I actually have a list of 5 questions that I send everybody. So one is, why are you in this business? What have you committed to it? What will you do if you fail? What will you do as successful? And give me your top 5 metrics on a dashboard from customer attraction to revenue.
I think also related to this, one of the big questions that is often not asked is, what is the specific problem you're trying to solve? We often see solutions, kind of looking for a problem. We have sometimes entrepreneurs that have developed this great tech product, and they're like, this is awesome, we're going to sell it to someone, but no one's really got a problem that solution is the right fit for. And so rather than kind of being a hammer, going out and looking for a nail, know your problem really well. And this is where being embedded in the community, and some businesses need customers, but others, customers are not the sign of success. It's users or other metrics for traction. And so knowing exactly why that metric matters to the problem you're trying to solve, if it's solving homelessness, if it's solving access to education, perhaps revenue is not the right metric, perhaps it's some other metrics. And being able to explain the problem through having either personally experienced it and then gone out and talked to users, customers, potential beneficiaries, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think for me, when I sat on the other side of the table, first round trained us to really a lot of entrepreneurs came to us with really good ideas. I mean, there was a strict vetting process before we even had a meeting. But I think that one of the questions that you kind of can ask is more so, how with what their business model is, compared to their market size, how much money can they make? Because sometimes a VC won't invest in you because simply, to your point, it's not a 10, they don't feel they can get a 10x return from your business, right? You may have a nice $5 million exit, $20 million exit, but when you have a fund that's $170 million, they're looking for billion-dollar opportunities. So I think that understanding to make sure that entrepreneurs, like, how much, okay, let's say they can switch to customers. How much money can they make per customer? What's the lifetime value of those customers? And how does that apply to their market size? If their market size is only 2 million people and they're only making $1 off every, I'm just throwing some out there, $1 of every customer, that's probably a great lifestyle business. They'll probably can make a nice living for themselves and their family. It's probably not going to be venture backed. And I think that entrepreneurs should really come prepared with if they're in a space that's really crowded and what they're doing is not disruptive, it's really hard for any real investor to really give them the time of day. And disruptive in the sense that, okay, there's a venture that, the treatments for cancer and, they develop a cure for cancer. That's disruptive and that's probably outlandish. But the idea is that, people who are in really crowded space are not going to get funded too much. So really making sure that you really understand how they're disruptive and how they differentiate themselves from their competitors, because that, to your point, will determine whether customers will make that switch. And once they make that switch, how much money, really understanding how much money they can make per customer is really important, because I've seen a lot of businesses that are great business for the founders, and they'll get no's from VCs all day because their business is probably max going to make $5 million a year. So.
Okay, we have another question.
Hey, I actually have two questions if we have time for it. So the first, my name is Kristen Bryan. I work for a small company called Commonwealth. We focus on building solutions to make people more financially secure. So my first question is really just about getting more venture capitalists of color. I live in Boston, and if you look at VC's websites in Boston, oftentimes what's up there is, 6 people who all went to the same New England school, who are all white. And so just kind of curious.
You're in Boston.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very
That's
true.
awesome.
But just thinking about it
Yeah.
from a standpoint of kind of career paths to, VC and getting more influence from that perspective, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And then secondly, from this perspective of the entrepreneurs you're talking about supporting, I often find that a lot of times there's a variety in the level of detail and how well people are positioned to answer some of the questions that you talked about for their business ideas. And it seems like a lot of white men will bring their idea to a group of people earlier than some women might, or some people of color. So how do we get kind of a better understanding of encouraging people to start talking about ideas earlier, seeking out kind of low risk funding or opportunities as soon as they have an idea to get them started, versus getting fully baked and not having, enough feedback?
Can I make a comment? The last part? The second part of the question, I'm sorry, I've just turned it to a panelist again. To me, one thing that I actually get annoyed with at times is when I feel like there are gatekeepers in our communities who don't speak life over people's businesses. And as we talk about these 5 questions or whatever we're doing, I just want to make sure that we're putting people in positions to be successful, regardless of whether we give them the money or not, right? So in this instance, sir, where you mentioned that they couldn't answer, others, to me, I feel like our communities go through so much anyways. And to even be in a situation where you're putting yourself out there to try to start a business, only to then put it into the universe for people to squander it because they also don't believe in you, and they want to make you jump through hoops and go through all kinds of miles and run through river bends. It's just kind of you feel defeated. Where do you go for support? And so I think part of that has to do with I don't care whether you give them $1 or not. Giving them part of your mind is part of social capital, and they need access to that in a space that is encouraging. So that's the only thing that I can say about that second part, because I have found personally, and I have seen, where I feel like people have left circumstances feeling very beat down and not uplifted. And it's just kind of I've also seen people receive multiple millions of dollars for ideas that I'm just how, Sway? How? we need answers, Sway. You know what I mean? How did you get through, but yet I'm putting someone through the ringer over here. And so I just want to share that because I think any entrepreneur in this room understands what I'm talking about with that space. And those people on the ecosystem side, like, we got to figure out a way to be supportive and encouraging. That's just my answer to the second part.
So I would say it's important to be supportive but honest.
Absolutely.
I will say that I see lots of entrepreneurs, I'm like, I don't know how the hell you got about that class and you still can't write a balance sheet.
Yeah.
And your retained earnings was left over.
Yes.
Right? That was like accounting 101. So I do think there's a distinction between support and rigor.
Yes.
Because as much as all the civil rights, we ain't there yet. And if you go in there and you screw up, you done shut down 20 people behind you.
Yep.
So we still carry an additional level of baggage and responsibility that we can't be half-assed. And I think we have to be careful that we compare for the purpose of understanding what our potential is, but we don't compare so that we have people settle for less than us because then we're not going to be successful.
Yes.
In terms of the venture capital side, I would say there are a lot more African Americans coming out. Many of us, I got into being a venture capitalist because I had a cashed out business. It is a very hard job. I've run 2 funds. It is 24/7, 365. And I would say that it's not glamorous and sexy. It ain't cool. You ain't no G2. You are hustling and you're rolling up your sleeves and you're helping people who half the time won't listen to you. And so I think one of the challenges, and I want to call it like it is, one of the challenges that many African American investors are having is that African Americans don't want their money. Because if they believe that they can get Mark Andreessen's money, they're going to take his money over my money because they don't believe that we have the same level of social capital. And that's where we have to be mindful that you have to know what it is you want. It's not about the money. Sometimes I would say, yeah, you should go get that white boy's money because you know what? His Rolodex is bigger than mine. But if you're early on and you're trying to tap into a market that they're not familiar with, then let me help you. But I think that people have to understand if it's your money, go for it. But when you start managing other people's money, it is a tremendous amount of pressure that will cause you to lose your mind and probably even be talked about because people say, well, how come you invest in that company? Because it's not going to get me the money back I need to get to my investors. I had $140 million of other people's money. I wasn't sleeping at night. I certainly wasn't coming to sleep with you because both of us were going to be hopeless. Right?
And everybody was right. And everybody was restless.
So
everybody's restless.
So I do think we have to understand, right, that when we talk about money, particularly in America, we are talking about capitalist markets. And I am so frustrated as a finance person and as a black person that people don't understand how the financial markets work. And it is not just money does not fall out the sky.
Right.
And so I do think that there's a level of financial education that needs to happen for every single entrepreneur. If I see one more entrepreneur, when I say, when was the last time you balanced your checkbook? And they go, I don't know, but I got these balance sheets. Yeah, but you probably didn't do them. And so you have to be able to understand, to your point, manage 1,000 to get to the next. And so I think there are lots of black people who want to be venture capitalists, who are realizing how hard it is, who are realizing the pipeline is not as robust as we say for venture capital money. Tons of different friends and family. And so I don't want to push people out there and they're going to be sitting on dry powder, people saying, look, there's not enough black people to take it. And that's what's beginning to happen as these micro VCs grow. You've probably got about $20 million right now sitting in Silicon Valley with small micro VCs that cannot get to black and brown entrepreneurs because they're not ready.
Okay, does anybody else on the panel want to we have 3 minutes and 30 seconds left. Anybody else want to answer that question or I'm going to move on?
Yeah, I might just quickly jump in.
Okay.
Just on
Take it to the 30.
Yeah, so in terms of the question around VC, how to get into VC, I do think, while that's absolutely true, we do need more of a reflection of our society in the institutional capital world. I think what we see is, because we don't have enough women, people of color, underrepresented members of society writing checks, you have this reciprocal cycle of the same people getting money. And where I see this really being a problem is when we're trying to solve problems in the community that are disproportionately experienced by certain members of the population, yet the people trying to solve these problems are not people that really understand these problems personally, but want to solve them just as a bystander. And so it's absolutely critical, not just for diversity's sake, but to create real solutions to real problems, to have these founders not just getting money, but also being the people writing checks. Women are more likely to write checks for women than a male investor. That doesn't mean that's the only reason we need women in VC, but we need these different actors to be involved in the capital to be able to reflect the true society that we're living in.
Awesome. Okay. Yes, sir, here.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. My name is Joe Bonneville. I'm from the National Science Foundation with one of my coworkers here. One of the things we work on is small business innovation research grants, and grants that you get is free money. It's non-dilutive. You can take it, you can use it. And one of the things that I got a question for is we haven't talked about the founders of these organizations, right? So the founding team, a lot of the VCs that we work with and the companies that we work with, they don't necessarily have a team. They may just have one person that is focused on, this is my idea, I'm not willing to pivot. I just kind of wanted to ask a question on what you guys thought about the founding team and moving forward with that investment in a VC.
I mean, I would just say it's extremely important, right? If for nothing else around delegation of duty, right? If particularly investment is about velocity of a business, then you certainly need more hands on deck. I do think, though, that people have gotten much more sophisticated on what is a team. It's not just a group of bodies, but what is the complementary experience required. And I think that's where it gets hard, right? Because then it's not just about finding the skill set, it's somebody who's willing to take the risk. Because there is a bias if you're full-time versus part-time. There's a bias of all these other things if you're a woman versus a man. But I would just say, I echo that it is important to have a founding team. I would also say, though, for the SBIR, I'm so glad it's a tremendous opportunity. So I co-chair NACI, which advises Commerce Department. And in DC, the SBIR program went away because they didn't have enough applicants. And that is a doggone shame. That is indeed, I'd almost say it's free. Nothing in life is free. But it is a relatively competitive process that could really be beneficial to diverse entrepreneurs. But oftentimes, they don't either have the technical expertise or they're not even aware of the program. And so that is something that I would highlight, that there are tons of government programs that are there to help you. And you better hurry up and get them now before the next 100 days.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, we have a question in the back. Yes, sir, very eager.
Hi, thank you. This panel is phenomenal, and it really should be, people should be stacked up to the ceiling because there's so many entrepreneurs in this region, black and brown. I just have a couple of comments. My name is Jim Carr. I'm with Turquoise Bay Investment Partners, and I'm also a member of the board of Global Policy Solutions. Two things, in particular, Melissa's comments. I love that presentation that you made, and I definitely want to follow up with you. One of the things, though, you said 5 things entrepreneurs that you look for, and I smiled because I think all of those are really important, but I would say I would put ahead of 2 of those things. Why are they in it? I would rather know whether they can quantify the market that they're in, whether they can quantify the share of the market that they could even either dominate or play a major role in. I want to know that they can be real players. Can they quantify the competitors with which they are, sort of fighting it out? Because many times folks just don't really focus on market size, market share, and competitors. And then the other thing is the issue of, this one really made me smile, the issue of what they will do if they fail. I'm more interested in them convincing me, and quantitatively convincing me they will not fail. Because I believe that an entrepreneur's belief in themselves is a big, big part of why someone ultimately offers them capital, because as you know, it's a big trust issue. And so if you're really trusting them, then you're trusting they will succeed, not that they have a game plan to sort of wrap up if they fall apart. And then the other thing is, the gentleman made this comment about 10 times better. I think that's a really important comment, because the fact of the matter is blacks and browns always have to do 10 times better. At the same time, I want to put a little softening on that, and that is to say we shouldn't really hold ourselves to needing to be 10 times better and 10 times better in order to get financing. Because all companies don't grow as fast as Facebook, Google, and a lot of other companies. They're just solid companies that have a solid business plan, and over the next 3 to 5 years, they will be turning substantial revenue and creating millions of dollars, in return. So I think we shouldn't have to hold ourselves to that ultimate standard, and I think we need to push venture capitalists who are saying we have to be better to say, no, we only need to be as good as non-Hispanic white firms that get venture capital all the time. Because at the end of the day, we're shooting for equity, and equity doesn't mean we get it only to the extent that we're 10 times better than any of you.
You just tried to ease your way onto this panel. I see how you did that. Gave us our closing remarks. Thank you, sir.
That's why you sit next to Maya.
Right. Awesome. Okay, we have completely run out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists again, so if we could give them a round of applause. Maya and her entire team, and again, thank you all for having such an engaging conversation and discussion with us. Awesome.